thanks for taking a few seconds just to say hello to each other. Tonight's lecture is, like social innovation itself, a little bit eclectic. It operates in a space of hybridity. For those of you who are interested in academic literature, it's drawing on sociology, theories of entrepreneurship, public policy studies, and a bit of design thinking. For those of you who are interested in practical examples, it's dealing with macro, meso and micro examples of social innovation across all sectors. And for those of you who can't handle any of that at this time of night, it's dealing with a bit of popular culture and a bit of literary culture. Being me, I know I've got more to say than I have time to say it. The intended plan is that we've got about half an hour, including the last few minutes, to talk with you about the topic. So unusually for me, I've written a fair bit of it down, but I'll be speaking to a few slides for those of you who are visual learners. We'll have a few slides to keep us entertained. So, first of all, just to get started, I thought typically we should start with how we might define social innovation. It's clearly a bit of a buzz term at the moment. It's gained a fair bit of, if not practical legitimacy, symbolic legitimacy in some camps, although I don't think that social innovation in the Australian context is as widely a utilised term as some of the other terminology that's more emergent around social entrepreneurship and social enterprise. But if we look at least two definitions just to start off, acknowledging that there is a huge number of definitions around, I think there are two definitions that capture a good degree of the sentiment of the social innovation movement, if you like, and I'll talk about its movement characteristics a little bit later on. The first one, which is for those of you who are aware of the social innovation literature, would be very familiar with Bills et al., their definition of social innovation that was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review in 2008. And they define social innovation as a novel solution to a social problem that is more effective, efficient, sustainable, or just than existing solutions, and for which the value created accrues primarily to society as a whole rather than to private individuals. So the emphasis there is on not just novelty, the idea of newness, but the improved side of social innovation or innovation generally. So new and improved solutions to complex societal needs. Another leading thinker, some of you would know, he was a thinker in residence in South Australia about 5 years ago, is Jeff Mulligan from the UK. And Jeff and colleagues defined social innovation a few years ago as having three particular dimensions. The first was new combinations or hybrids of existing elements. The second was cutting across organisational, sectoral and disciplinary boundaries and leaving behind compelling new relationships. So the interesting thing about that particular definition is that it's very relationally focused. It's focused on the idea that relationships are the infrastructure for social change to happen, that it's focused very much on ideas of integration and cross-cutting, so moving beyond our silos and thinking in different ways and practicing in different ways across our silos. So those are two common definitions that I think capture quite a lot of the sentiment of social innovation. But if we think about it in terms of dominant discourses of social innovation, that's another way to think about it. So one thing I'd say before I move on to the dominant discourses is that what's interesting to me, as traditionally a sociologist, although I do a few different things now, is that there's been very little discussion either in the literature or in practice about just what social benefit is. And in any advanced liberal society, that is actually a responsibility of the polity to debate, to deliberate, and to think about what constitutes social benefit. So while we might all be able to commonly agree that we think that certain social outcomes are better than others, there's a whole lot of social outcomes that would be highly progressive for one person or one organisation and considered to be reprehensible for another, particularly in a diverse society. And there's not been a great deal of discussion in the social innovation movement about just what constitutes social benefit and how we determine it collectively. Looking at the discourses of social innovation, and this is a little bit of the world according to Joe, but based on my reading and analysis over 15 years or so, I think there are three major discourses of social innovation at work. And by this I mean the processes of language, behaviour and rhetoric, if you like, that define the reality of what social innovation is. I'm not suggesting that particular social innovations fit within only one discourse. In practice, they often cut across them. But in terms of the three camps, if you like, of social innovation that we can identify. The first one was an early iteration related to people-centred design capabilities. And this partly has its origins in the dot-com boom. A few dot-com billionaires and probably a few bankrupts were starting to go back to their original roots, the reasons that they got involved in IT and the development of the web early on, which for some people was very much around democratisation of information and new methods for sharing and accessing and using information. So this particular discourse of social innovation is particularly focused on ideas around user-centred service design or people-centred service design, and particularly but not exclusively focused on technologically enabled user-centred processes. So the potential for crowdsourcing, crowdfunding and so on to create new infrastructure through which groups of people can get together to solve problems. The second and related discourse, which relates to the Phil et al. Definition that I gave, talks about the search for new and improved solutions to wicked social problems. So the idea that we live in an era of complex problems. Ulrich Beck described them as as a global. Described the society as a global risk society. He was arguing that there are some kinds of global problems that are democratising in a sense. So environmental problems, for example. And within this particular discourse of social innovation, a lot of the discussion is talking about new organisational forms and new combinations of organisational forms. So this is where the area that's one of my key areas, as John mentioned, social enterprise and social entrepreneurship is really located, this particular discourse of social innovation. A third and more recent discourse, which is gaining ascendance, which is partly to do with attention from policymakers and partly to do, quite frankly, with the fiscal constraints that certain parts of the world are currently facing, could be most bluntly described, and is described by one of my colleagues at QT, as cheaper, better, faster. And this particular version or discourse of social innovation is particularly organised around a modernisation of government agenda and the role of non-government actors in delivering services in a cheaper, better, faster way. And I don't mean to be cynical about that as a discourse. I'm not suggesting that any one of those discourses is better or worse, but just to say that you can see that the language of social innovation is playing out in quite different ways, both chronologically and across the interests of people who are actors who have got different agendas around it. But within this cheaper, better, faster discourse, we're also seeing a bit of a focus on that cross-cutting stuff that Jeff Mulger talked about. So collaborations and relationships across sectors. The current movement in collective impact, which some of you would be engaged with, is very much addressing some of those questions and how we might work across sectors and across organisations to come up with these cheaper, better, faster, or new and improved solutions. So my point in outlining these discourses is not to suggest that any of them are better than the others, but just to say that that they are in play when we talk about social innovation and we see the practice of it. For those of you who feel that deep discussions about discourse is not really what you're after at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening, we might move on to some concrete examples. Oh, there we go. Sorry, I've got a very strange view on there that's not the same as what you can see up there, which is causing my adult brain a bit of confusion. Now, this is very bad PowerPoint 101 in terms of the fact that it's got too much text on it, which shows you how much is in my brain that I wanted to talk about. And I'm not going to try and speak to every single example. But if we look at different concrete approaches to social innovation as represented in that table, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, there's a lot that's not represented here, and one of the things that I would note is that almost all of my examples reflecting what I was thinking about at the time are civil society-led social innovations. Now, there are forms of social innovation that are led by government, and I look to Barry over here, who we've been having a conversation about local government-led social innovation. There are forms of social innovation that are led by the corporate sector, but these were the ones that were on my mind at the time. But if we look at these examples of social innovation, the first one, the welfare state, is considered to be a social innovation of its time, and it's the level, the level of systemic change that it was trying to address was the institutional level. And we might have some concerns about the quality and relevance of the welfare state in its current iteration. But 70 years ago, it was a radical transformation that was trying to respond in the post-war era to some of the inadequacies of previous forms of social care that were fundamentally based on charitable and family-based networks. If we look at people-led design and delivery, we see that there is a range of examples here that operate at a whole lot of different systemic levels, from the family through to the community through to the society. And I've put up a few examples here. I won't speak to all of them, but just to note that Family by Family, which is located in South Australia through the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, has enabled that work, and Neighbourhood Mothers in Berlin are both a very similar model, although their focus is very different. Family by Family is based on, it's peer-based work. Families who've had tough times, who know how to get through them, working with other families who are experiencing tough times, who want to get through them. A Neighbourhood Mothers program in Berlin is women in Berlin who are recently established, not so recent migrants, working with other women and families in the home to assist them in developing language acquisition, access to services and so on. So it's women who've been through it, helping other women and families who are going through it. If we look at the North Karelia example in Finland, I just wanted to comment on that one. It came out in the 1970s, and it was really a citizen-led movement in a region of Finland that was trying to radically overhaul what they saw as the inadequacies of the public health system. The benefits of that particular regional example then flowed out and developed state level or provincial level and national level radical modifications to the public health system. Looking at maximising the sociality of business models, and this is one of the areas in which I get particularly excited, we're seeing a bit of a resurgence of interest in community and cooperatively owned business models at the moment. And this is not a whim, and I think that the Danish wind energy industry is the best example. Denmark has the leading number of community and cooperatively owned wind farms in the world. It also has the greatest uptake of wind farm technology of any nation in the world. And the reason for that correlation is that communities, when they own the asset, suddenly like to use the asset. And when communities don't own the asset, they probably don't like to use it. So the introduction of that particular alternative technology or renewable energy technology has been easier because of that particular use of a business model. Another example, building bridging social capital. So that means relationships between diverse people. And we see examples there. I won't call on all of them, but I just want to call on the Chutzpah factory, which I contemplated not including it because it's going through a demise at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good example of innovation. The Chutzpah factory was actually based in Queensland. It was based on PhD research, so there is a role for research in this, that identified that homeless young people who displayed challenging or high-risk behaviours had the same personality profile as CEOs of large corporations. So that particular piece of research was used to devise a program and subsequently an organisation that linked those CEOs with those young people in a range of entrepreneurial and educative activities. Socialising the supply chain, the fair trade movement will be very familiar to many of you. Food Connect is an example of community-supported agriculture initiative that comes out of South East Queensland, but has been very innovative in modelling what it does in other parts of Australia and around the world. And this is recognising that there is potential within economically productive processes to create opportunities for financial inclusion, social inclusion, but more than inclusion, participation and empowerment. So these are just some of the examples that I've put up. In terms of entrepreneurship theory, for those of you who are interested, in entrepreneurship theory there's sort of two camps around how entrepreneurs access resources. One focuses on a fairly strategic, rational actor idea that entrepreneurs go out, pull together resources through effective planning processes, consulting their bank managers, etc. The other version, the other camp, the emergent camp of entrepreneurship and resourcing is captured in the concept of bricolage, which is making do with the means at hand and creating something where nothing previously existed, to quote the work of Baker and Nelson in particular. The resource work cooperative in Hobart is just one concrete example that I wanted to use with regard to that. A worker-owned cooperative that is in the resource recovery business, but its primary job is to create employment for its workers. One of the things that resource recovery has, the co-op has done, is recognise an opportunity, an entrepreneurial opportunity, which is stripping down houses that are going to be demolished on site in order to recover the most resources that they can and create the greatest number of jobs that they can. That is a service that is commercially attractive to its clients because it's meaning that they're having to pay less to remove the waste from demolition sites. So this is a case of social entrepreneurs identifying the latent value in waste and saying, actually, we can use this in a number of ways to create meaningful employment, to engage in resource recovery, and to create new products out of that. And then finally, path-breaking in technological, commercial and social practice. I just wanted to make the point here that I think that sometimes when we think about social activity, civil society activity in the social economy, we think in terms of following innovation from the commercial sector. I would want to note that in the National Library, it's documented that Maningrida Arts and Culture, which is an Indigenous arts cooperative in the Northern Territory, was marketing and selling Indigenous art online in 1996. So when we talk about ideas about commercial innovation, in fact, in small ways, they're sometimes operating within the social innovation and social enterprise space. I'm just going to press that button, which will make it disappear, but it will come back. The point of going through some of those examples, and I am conscious that I don't have a clock in here, so John, you might need to tap me when I'm starting to run out of time, is I wanted to make a couple of comments. One is that all of these examples are about systems change. It's just that the scale of the system that they're attempting to change differs radically. The system may be, in sociological terms, the household. The system may be the whole of society, and the system may be the globe. The system may be politics. The system may be education. So a lot of the discussion about social innovation is about systems change. But I think that what's embedded in that is an assumption that that means everything has to be bigger, greater, huger. And in fact, what we see in social innovation is a lot of diverse systems change occurring. The other observation that I wanted to make was that a lot of these innovations are incremental innovations. So they're incremental improvements rather than massive, what we call breakthrough innovation. And the third point that I wanted to make, for those of you who didn't pick it up yourselves, is that quite a lot of these examples are about reproducing aspects of the system that have fallen away at some point. So developing relationships, ensuring that families in a neighbourhood know each other, making more labour-intensive, economically productive processes. In a sense, not everything, but some things that were old are new again. And that, in a way, suggests that we're in a constant state of evolution, and innovation is about improvement in a given time. The other thing that I wanted to say about this is that a lot of these social innovations, I've given you a lot of organisational or program level individual examples, but a lot of the innovation that occurs through these activities is not what occurs within the organisation, but within their rhetorical processes and their power to persuade other actors to buy into the particular initiative or mission that they're interested in. So in a sense, some of the larger breakthrough innovation that occurs through social innovation practice is not what happens within the individual workers cooperative in Hobart, but how that activity is communicated and how it inspires our sociological imagination, to use C. Wright Mill's concept. How it inspires us to think about how we connect to systems and how they connect to each other. This can create some of a challenge around change in terms of the idea that social innovation, a lot of social innovation is about emergent practice. So it hasn't happened yet. And in an environment where we're looking for newer, better, faster, we actually want metrics to understand what constitutes better. But social innovation is often not really often at a point where it's actually able to demonstrate that kind of impact because it is emergent practice. So how can we back the best of social innovation? Well, when I wrote that heading, I had inverted commas around the best, but they got taken out when the invitation was sent out. I said I was going to talk about literary theory, or literary reference. F. Scott Fitzgerald's famous quote at the end of The Great Gatsby, those of you who, like me, studied English literature, is commonly thought about as a comment on the paradox of the great American dream. I was about to say the great Australian dream. I really need to go to bed. And it's talking about the paradox of nostalgia. In a sense, I think that when we're asking questions about how can we back the best of social innovation, we're probably asking the wrong question, because we're putting ourselves in a position of an impossibility. Once something is determined as being the best, it's probably no longer highly innovative. It's probably moved along to a state of, it's been institutionalised to a degree where it's not at the point where it's needing to be backed, if you like. So in a sense, it feels like there's an impossible paradox around the idea of backing the best of social innovation. But what we can do is back and support social innovation systems. The systems that sit behind, that fertilise, that grow the environment and the ecosystem in which social innovation might happen. So, what does growing the social innovation system look like? Well, again, this is an inadequate account of what might be involved, but I wanted to pick up on a few points with regard to this particular slide. One of the things that's very apparent in parts of the world where social innovation seems to be gaining ground is a set of imperatives that perhaps we haven't felt here, and that's not represented on the slide. So in Europe, for example, the European Union has rebranded itself as the Innovation Union, and social innovation is seen as an important plank of the innovation agenda in the EU. Now that is clearly largely a response to what has happened as a result of the GFC, and we're perhaps not experiencing that in the same way here, so we don't have quite the sense of urgency, although our time may yet come. But apart from what's not on the slide, the things that I wanted to point out in particular is that business evidence around the relationship between investing and outcomes in commercial innovation is very disparate in its findings. But the one thing that there's quite a decent amount of consensus around is that investing in the intermediary environment to support innovation does lead to stronger innovation outcomes. And I'm not suggesting, without testing that, whether that is actually true in the social innovation space, but it does suggest that there is both a greater need to understand and invest into the intermediary environment to support social innovation. And this is not about investing into particular intermediaries that may have claimed the rhetorical space about what social innovation is. There has to be diversity within the intermediary system. But in a sense, in the Australian context, although we've seen a growth of intermediaries in this field over the last 10 years or so, there hasn't been a lot of investment by philanthropy, by government, and by civil society itself in progressing that intermediary system. To me, that sends a bit of an alarm bell. Another thing is that even though the social innovation activists are very vocal and expressive around the idea of people-centred service design and people and design-led approaches to social change, really there hasn't been a lot of systematic commitment to user-centred or people-centred approaches. What we've seen in the Australian context thus far, recognising that it's still pretty early days, is a stronger focus on social enterprise and social entrepreneurship, assuming that they are vehicles for social innovation. Now, I can tell you that not all social enterprises are innovative, and not all forms of social innovation occur through social enterprise. Now, I'm not suggesting that every single actor in the social innovation system or investing into it is going to address every single one of these factors. But what I am suggesting is that a systems level approach to the way we think about social innovation and how it comes to fruition is needed. So different actors understanding their role in the bigger picture is a really critical aspect of developing a systems-based approach, as I would argue, for what is needed in social innovation. But the other thing that I would say is that I think there's a bit of an elephant, possibly not in this room, but there's an elephant in the room with some of the organisations with which I work fairly regularly. And that is around, going back to that discourse around the .com inspired discourse. It's a question around open source. And partly because of the ascendancy of the social entrepreneurship discourse of social innovation, I think there is an assumption that market models are going to deliver every single thing that we need in terms of social change. There is a real problem there. We have thousands of small, non-profit and social enterprise organisations measuring their impact, using different methodologies, not sharing that information with anybody. There's no common data collection, there's no analysis of that. Some of them are doing it in order to engage in organisational learning, and I acknowledge Beck Scott over there from Street Social Enterprise, who's best practice in this sort of space. But a great deal of them, according to my research, are not 100% sure why they're doing it. And the elephant in the room with regard to that is that we're developing an industry in impact measurement, and that means that there is privatisation of knowledge occurring, some of which may be entirely valid, but if our ultimate collective object is social change, there needs to be some difficult conversations had about what needs to be in the open source space and what knowledge and practice is best held by experts and exposed to the benefits of competitive processes. So this is somewhere where I think universities have a potential to play a more substantial role, is in being stewards of some of the open source commitments that I think need to occur. Now, how long have I got?
3 minutes.
Okay, excellent. I've talked a little bit about developing the social innovation system, but there was a reference to alchemy in the original blurb for this talk. It's the nature of presenting these talks that one comes up with the blurb before one writes the paper. But I did want to make sure that I touched on the idea of alchemy. So, no more words on the slides, but in public policy studies, quite a lot of researchers at the moment are talking about metaphors of sedimentation to describe layering and sedimentation to describe what's going on in contemporary approaches to government. The argument here is that we're not seeing radical destruction of systems, and that in fact stability of systems is what makes society function reasonably well. But what we are seeing is layering of different modes of practice working together. Now, the idea of sedimentation doesn't work fantastically for me because I'm not a geologist and it just feels too fixed. So I've just shifted over to a layer cake to deal with the metaphor of the layers, but make it a little bit different. I think that one of the paradoxes for any movement is that movement actors are trying to command symbolic legitimacy. They're trying to talk into being the vision that they want to see. And in doing that, it leads to a fair bit of hyperbole. In the case of social innovation, a bit of hyperbole around radical transformation and changing everything. In fact, I think that really what social innovation is about the bits in between the layers on the cake. Now, for those of you who watch MasterChef, you know that the integrity of those layers is critical, but what really matters in the end is the taste. And the best tasting bits are where there's a clash of flavours, a clash of textures at those points between the layers. This, I think, is where social innovation plays its most important role to date. So when we talk about, for example, charitable activity in response to natural disasters, we're not seeing the death of charity, although that was proclaimed by Nick Francis and a few other people 10 years ago. What we're seeing is the potential for charitable activity to be amplified and directed to the right places through innovative platforms that allow that to happen. So that's one example. I think like many social innovators like the ones in Hobart that I talked about, one of the things that this layer approach can encourage all of us to do is to look for the latent value in those layers. So rather than getting rid of them, let's turn our heads sideways and see how they might work differently and what their different values might be that can contribute to social progress. The final thing that I wanted to say really about this idea of the layers is that clearly, well, it's not the final thing I want to say, clearly we're not, despite the hyperbole about radical change, government is and will always be in an advanced democratic society the primary vehicle for, if not the delivery, at least the design of social services and the role of there's a role of the polity in that, in determining what constitutes social value. So of course there's always going to be continued debates had about the function and form of each of these layers and whether they're continuing to do their job properly and whether they're contributing to the integrity of the cake. And this is not this metaphor falls down because this was built to a recipe, and a lot of what this layering and sedimentation is about, there is no blueprint for it. So there is a chance that the cake will fall over at some point. But rather than a radical rejection of pre-existing layers that provide the basis for the cake, I think that social innovation can work at the interstices or interstices between the layers to create ideas about what might be possible to further extend and grow that cake. Thank you for your attention.